pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll start with a roll call.
Okay. Brandy Pelletier.
Eunice Landry.
Eliza Drolet.
Jason Henry.
Tim Broderick.
Heidi Duford.
Howard Drolet.
Matt Jazokis.
Usual suspects. I'll take a motion on the agenda.
I make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Is there anything to be added, deleted, subtracted, or anything else? Seeing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Next up is approval of meeting minutes of November 19th, 2025.
I make a motion to approve the meeting minutes of November 19th, 2025.
Second.
Any discussions? Anything changed? Seeing none, hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
At this time here, I'll open up for public input. A reminder to step to the mic, say your name. We have 3 minutes and up to 15 minutes total. Anybody in the public? Alright, seeing none, I will close public input. Next on the agenda here is the BES administration, the principal's report.
Good morning, everyone. So the enrollment report is attached to your packet. We're currently at 412 students. I included some extracurricular activity numbers for you to take a look at. So in our band, we have 54 students involved in band, 45 in chorus, and 29 in modern band. And then you can see the breakdowns for the different grades. Our band leader and director, Ms. Jalen, does a phenomenal job of recruiting kids, and she's really trying to build the band program, and she's doing a great job with really tough circumstances right now. You know, I was in to observe right before break, and she's on the stage, and you know, she's got the bigger 8th grade kids in there trying to, you know, learn guitar in a very small space. So, you know, she's doing a really good job at just, you know, trying to get kids involved in band, which is what we certainly want to do to keep pace with Alton and to bring those kids up to Prospect Mountain, because we all know what a great band program they have. So for our base programs, we had 74 kids in our fall base programs, and when this was written, I didn't have the numbers for our winter programs yet, but I can have those for the next meeting. But our winter clubs include intramural sports, open art studio, mathletes prep, and directed drawing. And our drama kids, we have currently 37 kids involved in that program. Cam Bailey is organizing an ice fishing trip, which will be in February up at TL Store. He'll be working with Fish and Game to provide an outdoor learning experience for our kids. So, you know, he's, again, just another example of a staff member really doing some really good things outside of, you know, the box thinking, and just trying to get our kids involved in more things. So we're really looking forward to that trip. And you know, and again, it's just another example of partnering with outdoor resources. You know, we're really trying to push that and partner with outdoor, you know, outside community resources. So his collaboration with both TL Store and Fish and Game are going to be a real benefit to our kids. We recently completed a dry food drive right before vacation. This is run by our student council. I wanted to give you an update on the sub coverage. So we have been able to hire a few more substitute teachers to provide coverage. I think since late November, I hired 3 more, and then 3 more are in the pipeline to be brought on board. So we've stopped relying on our go to our interventionist first. So if we can't get our actual subs in the building, then our next step is to use our interventionist. And pulling our paraprofessionals is really only a last resort. But like I said, hopefully with the people that we've gained since late November, hopefully we'll be all set. I wanted to bring up, so Rob Ellis sent this to me, and during a recent podcast episode of Off the Gravel Road, a student reflected on her experiences at this past fall's OWL program, which is the Outdoor Wilderness Learning Trip. And this is where our kids go up to spend the week at TL Storer. And this student said, I wasn't in a tent with someone I was familiar with. At that time, I really didn't like the person, but after those nights, I think we grew very close. We were very good friends. I think I would definitely do it again with someone new, so I could have that same experience and make new friends. So, just a great little piece of feedback for that program.
Well, and I think that was part of the intent of moving it to the beginning of the school year instead of an end of the year.
Mhm.
So it's nice to see that that's actually panning out.
Yeah, and where our kids are, at the beginning of the year, and they're getting to kind of know each other and whatnot. So here are some discipline numbers for the year so far. So we have we broke them down by month, and then number of incidences for each month. Let's see. So wanted to kind of update you on the progress of our MTSS system. So again, our tier 2 and tier 3 are fairly solid. We have a very good structure in place at those 2 tiers, and this year we're focusing on our tier 1 strategies. So the student support team meets weekly to discuss students who have been identified by teachers needing additional behavior support. And our team consists of our social worker, who is the chair, principal, assistant principal, dean, school counselors, our BCBA, special education team chair, and our school nurse. So the intention is to bring everybody who are quote-unquote experts in behavior to the table when we look at different kids. So each week we look at either new kids who have been brought to the team, or we look at kids who have been brought previously and take a look and see, what interventions are in place and if they're working or if we have to change things. So here are our numbers. So in September, we had 9 initial kids for referral, and we took a look at 4 kids for student monitoring. And October, we had 12 new referrals. November, we had 5 new kids, and December, we had 11 new kids come in for referrals. So our SST team are seeing a lot of kids, and we're reviewing a lot of kids each week. So again, that part of our MTSS system is going well, and we're still working on building our tier 1 systems. The Promising Futures Grant. So we're looking at a couple of things right now. At first, we were kind of looking at maybe purchasing the zones of regulation, but since that we've kind of, like Matt has reported to you in the past, we're possibly looking at bringing in Capturing Kids' Heart. So that would be something that we might use that money for to bring in Capturing Kids' Heart. So we're gonna discuss that a little bit. And I am looking at purchasing a licensing agreement with for Screenagers. It's a film about parents and how they navigate kids and their cell phones and what cell phone usage can do to kids. My hope is that I would like to have a community event up at the high school where we invite the community of Alton and Barnstead to come in, view it, you know, in the auditorium. Possibly work with one of the groups up there to do a fundraiser, you know, have a spaghetti dinner, and then we can go in and watch the film. So that's a couple of things that we're gonna look at for with some of that grant money. And that is all that I have for today.
Do you have counts from last year, this year, and discipline counts? Any comparisons? Are we up, down, or same?
So it's hard now because we moved from Power School to into the campus, so I'm not sure if I should be able to grab things, but I can definitely take a look at that. Yeah.
Sure, it's almost like see the trends, just kind of where we're at.
Yeah. Yep.
Anybody else have questions for the principal? Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Next up is, in our packet is the special education, Ann McDonald report. Does anybody have any questions, or does administration have anything that wants to go over, anything? Are we good? I think the robot has questions.
Well, maybe he's a member of the public.
Please come to the mic.
He's not 18.
Oh.
It's about 3.
All right, well then we'll.
Was that people years or animal years?
Robot years.
All right, then next up will be in our packet is the building and grounds report from Mr. Astot. Anybody questions, concerns? Okay. So and then next up is construction management committee and Eunice.
I don't have much to report. We've only had one meeting because of the holidays since our last board meeting, and our next meeting is next Thursday. We had to adjust our schedule because 2 Thursdays were holidays. Jason?
Yes, I found out.
But I do recall that in the last meeting we were beginning to talk about plans for how to work inside the school and try to lay out plans so teachers would know what to expect, you know, when they might have to move temporarily. So, I mean, that's a little ways off, but it's good that we're starting to talk about planning it. And anything else that was discussed is really in Sean's report, so.
Driving in feels claustrophobic out front now with that.
Yeah, but if you look up, it's progress.
It's
Wow.
progress, but it feels like claustrophobic when you're pulling on.
It's gonna get worse, Jason.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. All right, then we'll move on to financial reports. Do you have anything?
Everything is on track. Do you have any questions?
Anybody have questions for Heidi for finance? All right, seeing none. Move on to technology report. Mr. Dumont, it's in our packet here. Anybody have questions? Synthetic deep fakes. Okay. Curriculum, Matt?
Just a couple quick updates. The System-Wide Literacy Committee continues to meet. Our last meeting in December, we had taken a look at a survey and walked through some questions to kind of pare down the potential survey to our faculty and staff. So that has been sent out to both Alton and Barnstead, as well as the high school to get feedback from the faculty. Again, one of the main concerns that we had from last year was making sure that while this committee's in action, we also are listening to those who are going to be directly impacted by that. What we'll do is we'll take that survey, the survey results, and then what we'll do is we'll compare the ed reports along with what the state has deemed somewhat as an approved list of programs that they would accept. And so we'll do a crosswalk on that, and then that'll help us narrow down which ones we will pilot. Again, the idea would be to pilot 2 or 3, which includes not only piloting here in Alton, but also going to visit schools that are implementing those programs currently to get feedback from those who are in the process of using that again, what our goal would be is in May, come to both Alton and Barnstead boards and give you what we feel is the program that we want to purchase. Obviously, with the budget season at that point done, we'll spend it next year providing professional development in preparing for implementation the following school year. So that'll give us an entire year to really kind of dig down into this program. So a lot to do in the next several months, but the committee continues to do great work. Liza, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that?
Yeah, I just, I think the group coming together has probably been the biggest one in terms of having like members from BES, Alton, and the high school. The level of just teamwork and connection that's happening, even in some of the non-literacy specific things. Like I'm seeing more of them saying, hey, let's connect after the meeting and talk about this. And so the kind of synergies that are happening amongst the three schools is really cool to see. And I think that was always our intent. And I remember probably 9 years ago talking about that, and it just never really happened. It always felt like everyone was in their own silo, and it's happening now. So it's really cool to see.
That's a great point. I think if you go back to last year when we first met, they walked in and there was a table that had Barnstead teachers, a table that had Prospect, and a table that had Alton, and now they just come in and sit down. And I think the other piece is that the conversations are happening outside of those committee meetings and things of that nature, especially among the interventionists. So, as Howie mentioned, on November 19th, well, let me take a step back. I've been working with Howie and the administrative team along with the team reps, and really kind of taking a look at the MTSS and Tier 1 and some of the behaviors that have been happening and going on and the frustrations that people have expressed. And we've been talking about some different things, and one of the things that we did was we had a representative from Capturing Kids' Hearts come in and have a conversation with us, and it was more just a conversation about what is this process. Capturing Kids' Hearts is not a program, it's a process, and it's a pre-K through 8. It actually even goes through high school, and it's really kind of taking and aligning our vocabulary, aligning our expectations, and a lot of those different things, and it's really built on teacher-student relationships. And so after that meeting, I talked with the team reps about whether or not they wanted to attend a 2-day workshop in February, and overwhelmingly the team was in favor of that. So we'll send a group of 5 or 6 team members to a training February 10th and 11th, and then from there, if the team comes back and says we really think that this is the way we want to go, then I will work with Capturing Kids' Hearts on funding sources, but also implementation and training and things of that nature. So it's basically if it's something that we move forward with, it's not an if, it's all of us will be part of that. They're mainly in the Midwest, but they're moving towards New Hampshire and this side of the country. Newport right now is one of the schools that have adopted that, and they saw in the first quarter of the school year a 66% drop in their Tier 1 behaviors upon implementation. So again, it's something that's effective, but we'll see how the training goes in February. At the last board meeting, I believe I brought to you, or maybe the previous one, we had applied for a grant, the 603, Bridging the Gap in the 603. We did not get that grant, but we were asked to apply for it again next year. So we will do that again in hopes of getting that, and that's a lot of that's basic literacy, proficiency, and stuff like that, and support that we would need. So we will certainly try again. And that's all I have.
Any questions for Matt? Seeing none, we are now up to the superintendent report.
I do not intend to present the report that's in your packet that I prepared, but if you haven't had a chance to look at it, I did a fair amount of research here, and I'll just summarize really quickly. We've been collecting student achievement data now under No Child Left Behind and the Every Student Succeeds Acts for decades. We have a massive amount of data on how students do, at least in those tested subjects in school, which isn't everything that we do or hope to do at schools, but they are basic indicators of academic achievement And probably most important, we have them all over the country. So we can compare. Even though it's just those things, we can compare how students are learning to read, learning to do math, and those basic things in different school systems. That means that research on the factors that correlate with student achievement is really, really solid. Hold on to your seats for a second, please. Students who live in wealthier communities with more school funding tend to do better in school. I'm gonna let you digest that for a second. So I created, I can give you all these spreadsheets or access to them if you're interested. I took a look at where Barnstead ranks in the state. So this is not, what is the median household income, for example, but from 1 through 236 towns, where does Barnstead's median household income rank in New Hampshire? The answer to that specific question is 99th, and I was surprised to learn that. 133rd in per capita income. I was a little surprised. I wondered if maybe there are a lot of people living below the poverty line and that's being counterbalanced by some much wealthier, maybe retired people or something like that. Maybe second, these have to be primary homes. These are year-round residents, so they can't really be second homes. But so I looked at that and found that we're actually 60th from the top, from the fewest people living below the poverty level in Barnstead. Again, I'm not going through the whole thing in order and reading it to you, but I hope you'll spend a little bit of time with it. I also took a look at where the tax rate and total tax valuation in Barnstead ranks, and they're close to the middle of the state. And I guess the bottom line is that the narrative that I think I've heard as we prepare for our annual meetings every year, and that I'm just sort of accustomed to from talking to folks around town, is this perception that we have a needy community. And we do in some ways, there's no question. We do in some ways. But objectively, this is not one of the needier communities in New Hampshire. And I didn't really realize that until looking at this data. Now, when you look at how we fund education, last year we were 150th out of 161 school districts on per pupil spending. So in the bottom 10% of the state in per pupil spending. The average teacher salary last year, not this year under the new contract, so I think we've already gone in the right direction here. But we were 169th out of 194 school districts that reported average teacher salaries. So even though we may be around the middle in terms of sort of economic ability to support education, for one reason or another, it may not have been happening over the years, at least at the level commensurate with where Barnstead ranks in the state on these other measures. Then later in this report, I brought in test scores. Because we know, like I started, we know that students who live in wealthier communities tend to do better in school if we are around the average of the state in tax rate and per capita income and household income. I would expect, without knowing anything else, to be around average in the state in terms of student achievement. But of course we're not, and we know that. But that brings us back to this being one of the lower funded schools in the state on a per pupil basis and having lower teacher salaries. Maybe that's been a factor. I can't establish causation, like I can't say this is the reason for that. But these are facts that exist at the same time, so at least there are correlations here that are worth thinking about. So that's all it is. There's a lot here. If you want to read some of the research, I've got references in here, and I can email you. If you want to see the source documents, like what do you mean we rank 99th in per capita income? That can't be right. I'll send you the spreadsheet. At the end, I've summarized the things that mostly Matt and the principals have been leading around efforts to intervene in our student achievement, building common curriculum, working with classroom management that keeps kids and teachers engaged in learning, behavioral supports that keep kids engaged in learning, the literacy committee that we just talked about, and I think the math project that has to be coming up quickly on its heels. And what got me going with this was you all heard a presentation from the intervention team at your last Barnstead meeting, and I thought of it, and I thought out loud during the meeting. I said something to you about, at a school like this, we're trying to beat the odds, because we would expect if we're a less affluent community that student achievement will be lower, and the fact that I believed that made me check the data, and that's why I made this presentation, because it's not what I expected. I thought this was a little bit surprising. I think entering a March meeting when we're going to talk about a operating budget that's up 6%, but we're also servicing a bond, so that's an additional cost. There's going to be discussion in Barnstead about the cost of education, no question about it. You know, the community can talk about these things and make decisions, or just talk about them. But either way, there's a decision, right? Make the decision to support the things that we've now been working on with whether people make themselves aware of what's happening at school board meetings or not, very publicly. We've been working on some of these things for years now. And if the community doesn't choose to do it, we can predict the future, right? Just like every time I talk about enrollment, I can predict the future. As enrollment goes down, I know what's going to happen, and so do all of you. So when it's time to make a decision, you've got to bear in mind the cost associated with not making it, right? It's easy to, you can understand the cost of a proposed budget, or the cost of a bargaining agreement, or a cost of whatever warrant article, because it's listed right there. But there are also costs to not doing those things. And too often they seem to come in the form of student achievement. So that was about the best summary I could do of all those slides, Mr. Henry. Sorry if that was too long. That's my report.
I know, he's shooting for a record, so.
It's a very good report. And people have questions on it, or if this is something we can somehow share with the public somehow, some way, or paring it down to a couple pages, I don't know, but something we should definitely talk about, doing something.
Yeah, no, I think having the public to have a copy, even with the resources available.
Yeah, I think, and again, maybe slightly pared down, but I think having copies available, like in March,
Yeah.
would be helpful, because a lot of it does come up like, why are we spending so much? Well, we're not really. When you look, I mean,
Right.
education's expensive, and unfortunately, the way we do it in New Hampshire is broken. But when you look against other schools,
Yeah, I think stressing the importance of funding education to improve student learning is
Outcomes.
important.
right?
Also, we get complaints about our tax rate, but if you look at our tax rate compared to the state average, we're not that far off, so.
Pretty close to the middle, which again, kind of surprised me,
Yeah.
right?
I know,
Came
but
here
we're
with
always
this impression like we have a higher tax rate there. Now, look, I'm not saying the tax rate is low, and I'm not saying it's not hard to pay your taxes. Those things are true,
Right.
right? But it's interesting when you see where it ranks in the state.
I know, usually we get compared to one of the rich cities that,
Right, and you can't compare us to Rye. I mean, that's like absurd.
But also in the past 5 years, let's face it, the bubble of, assessments that people's houses have gone through the roof had nothing to do with it. It's the same tax rate, your house worth $100,000 more and it goes up, has nothing to do with us, but that's been across this country, and towns are
Agreed.
struggling that all over the place. And it's not gonna go down once our houses are worth less, because that market's starting to come down too, but they're not gonna recess us down that way.
Right.
It's just, anyways, my diatribe, sorry. All right, and so, other questions?
No, my written report is really about your action items. So if you want to segue.
Well, that will segue into our first action item, which is the operating budget for FY27 discussion.
So I distributed a memo on the table with all of this, and I want to emphasize, we serve in our offices an SB2 town, right, Alton, and a traditional meeting town here in Barnstead. So we're preparing these things on the SB2 deadline. You actually have more time for some of this. Now, for the budget, we meet with the town budget committee in January. So I think the board's action on the budget is probably important.
Yeah.
right now.
Our first meeting is on the 12th, so.
And we're scheduled to see them 3 times this year. And there's an example, Eliza. I think a summary of sort of what I just presented in that report for them will be important, and maybe we can work on more public.
Yeah, I think this whole package is good, but I think if you had a 1 to 2 page
Yep.
summary, but they get the whole packet too, so people want to search through it, they can search through it, but, or even just a 1 page bullet, hey, these are in here, boom, then you can go quickly search through it. I think that would be,
Yeah, I think highlighting just a few things, as a summary, but then give them the full report so they can digest it.
So-
as we do down in Concord for the legislators.
So my point about the traditional meeting format and deadlines versus SB2 is you'll want to take action on the operating budget here today. On the warrant articles, had a conversation with Jim. He and I agree that a meeting posted as a Barnstead meeting for you to take votes on the warrant articles is how we should do it. We do have a way for the future. I've always wanted to try this. I talked to Attorney Upton about it in the past, and Jim O'Shaughnessy's willing to work with us on it, that we could post joint and separate meetings when you meet on a monthly basis up at the high school. Then if the Barnstead board wants to take an action, its chair can have it take an action. There's no law that says you can't be sitting in 2 public meetings at the same time, is sort of the short version of that. We can talk about about that at the JMA. We don't have to right now, but there is a way to allow you to do that sort of thing. So Jim and I are working on that. In the meantime, though, the 3 articles beyond, sorry, the 4 articles, no, 3 beyond the budget, all represent things that the joint board has been working on, not for months, but for years.
Talking about the warrant articles?
Yeah, all the other
Well,
ones.
let's-
I'm just giving you an overview.
Well, let's just pause on that.
You want to do the budget?
Yeah, I didn't want, one thing at a time, so I think things
Okay.
are gonna take, I wanna make sure everybody has a chance to actually discuss what they wanna discuss. So, the operating budget, do you wanna talk about operating budget, or do they wish to vote on the operating budget, or which way is your pleasure?
I'd just like to make a comment because things have changed this year in the operating budget. If you look at the summary sheet, you'll see, and you look at Tim's memo, where he talks about the increase in the operating budget of the over $1 million, that does not include the bond interest or principal. If you look down, it's below that on the summary sheet, and the increase in cost is over $1 million, but it's, so I know Tim talked about this before, so at our district meeting, they're gonna vote on our operating budget, but they're not gonna vote on the bond costs. That's,
So here, this is where our laws are contradictory in New Hampshire. So it's infuriating, but these things are true. The bond, once it was voted in the meeting where it was approved by that ballot vote, that is going to be spent for 20 years. That's done. No action by an annual meeting can change it. And you don't, and this is in the law, do not have to have any subsequent votes on spending that money. However, the voters do approve the district's total appropriation for next year, which does include that money. So if you look at Article 2, which is just the budget, it is for $20,140,458. That's the far bottom line number that includes federal grant expenses and food service expenses that we recover through revenue, and debt service, that's bond payments, principal and interest. So they can't vote, the meeting cannot vote not to service the debt, but it does vote on the bottom line number. The reason I wanted to present this sheet like this is so people can actually see this is the cost of running the schools in the first yellow line. Then below that are the other costs added in? Because otherwise, if all you show is that $20 million number at the bottom, people want to know what you're spending all this money on, and you say, well, it's debt service, but it's confusing. So this way, it's very clear. This is the cost of operating the schools, up 6%, right? And in my memo, I've highlighted the two biggest drivers of that are out-of-district transportation, which is up $280,000, and Barnstead's share of the high school operating cost, which is up $629,392. So in $1,028,000 in increases, right? $1,029,000 round up. Total increases for running the schools. All but like 57,000 of that is those two lines. So most of it's the high school. And most of it is the high school for one primary reason, and that primary reason is that the percentage of students attending Prospect Mountain High School from Barnstead has gone up from 52.23 for the current year to 54.45 for next year. So that 2.2-ish percent increase is a lot of dollars because it both adds to Barnstead's and subtracts from Alton's. It shifts that money in this direction. We've seen it before, and we're seeing it this year.
Well, I guess what confused me, and now I realize I misspoke, but in your memo, you referred to the operating budget and the cost and the increase. And in the warrant article, you also call it an operating budget, but it includes debt service. It's confusing.
Yes, it is, and I disagree with DRA and the state in how they do this. I believe that you should have a capital article if needed, right? If you're asking for new money to be spent, and you should have an operating budget article because they are different things and they get approved differently.
So the attorney says one thing, and you're interpreting the laws one way, but DRA is saying something
So
different.
too often, in my opinion, we just do what DRA says, and the person who works at DRA is not a lawyer. But they're also the ones who authorize the release of the funds and set the tax rate.
Right, and if you don't do what they tell you
So
to
you
do.
you get stuck.
I think it's very confusing.
It's a terrible answer, and I'm not, like, none of this is because I like it. This is what we've learned about all of this.
All right.
Yeah.
And now, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's another significant difference that we'll see on the summary sheet. There's not going to be a separate warrant article for food service.
For food service or for federal grants. We made it down to the last two in the state who were still doing that, as DRA was asking
Those
us not
always
to.
seem silly to me. Like,
Well, they're
warrant
self-funding.
articles.
So the question is, do you spend the money and collect the money? And it's just strange. Look, I can go back in my mind 40 years, and I can guess it was a way to make the budget look lower.
You don't have to report it.
Hmm?
You do not have to report it. Federal money. Federal money is federal money.
We need to be authorized to receive it and spend
Years
it.
ago, it was never part of the budget.
It wasn't here.
There
Right.
wasn't
It
even
wasn't
a
here.
warrant.
We were one of two towns in the
Yeah,
state that didn't do
was
it.
never part of the budget.
There was
Right.
never even a warrant article
Oh, at all?
for a long time. There wasn't one.
We're not supposed to spend any money on anything beyond the total appropriation in this warrant article. So the only exception is unanticipated revenue, which, because the annual meeting has adopted RSA 180, whatever it is, giving the board the authority to accept and appropriate that money, you can do that. If the annual meeting hadn't had that vote in the past, you wouldn't even be able to do that. So say a competitive grant or something comes along that we didn't know about. We can come to you and say, we want to do this, you vote, we do it. And it has to be above 20,000, I think, or something like that. So below that, we can do those things. But otherwise, we're bound by this number. So when you read about the districts in the state that are overspending by $1.5 million or $5 million or whatever, it's compared to this number. That's what they're saying, is they've overspent their total appropriation, which regardless of revenue or whether the money's from taxes or grants or other revenues or wherever it's coming from, we're not supposed to spend more than this number in a given year.
The other thing I find confusing in your memo is the numbering of the articles.
Yep, so we have placeholders on the warrant right now for collective bargaining articles.
Yeah, but why would our operating budget be number 2?
Because number 1 is to hear reports and that
It's
sort of
normally
operating,
last.
operating budget is always the last one on
It
a.
shouldn't be, it should be first, and then the CBAs, and then all others.
To buy DRA or?
It's always been.
Yep, if you look at all the districts.
It's another way that Barnstead's just always been different from
We've always-
the rest.
So I
Why didn't
Change that.
DRA ever correct us then?
Well, I get a,
They've told her.
yeah. Is it next year, next year, next year? So,
Wow.
But DRA itself has changed over the years too, from the time you and I, from over the years. Because
it's
their
the way
record-
they,
it's
it
the way
has
they
something to do with the
changed over
money,
the years.
you know, how they put the money, it goes
Yeah,
to the first,
exactly.
to the second, to the third. So if you put your operating budget last, and something happens where we don't get that money,
Yeah,
that's where it's coming from.
right,
It's, you're gonna lose it there, all the others will be funded.
right. And I understand that. I just have a question. You might have addressed it when you were talking, and I probably missed it. On Article 2, where you're talking about the full appropriation, I noticed that you put in the fiscal note amount of the $5,000,009, which is the Prospect Mountain amount.
Mhm.
Why can't you not, and not, it might be because DRA wanted you to do that, break out where you have the actual BES operating budget, then also you have, just so it's
Yep.
clear,
I-
where people are knowing what they're voting on as opposed
Yep.
to, you know, because I have a pretty good intuition that someone's gonna try to cut the budget no matter what. But at least if you put it so that you have the 18 million showing this is the actual BES operating budget,
Yep.
then there's the debt service on top of it, which they really, you can say you can't touch. I mean, you can tell them that, but I'm just saying to make the clarity
Yep.
of what they're voting on. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes, I do.
Would have to
And I
be,
agree with you. And one year, I tried to, we can't do it in the article, I tried to do it on a slide and all hell broke loose.
Yeah, sometimes
remember-
less
I
is
remember-
more.
People got more confused.
Yeah.
It was terrible. I would love to try again, because I agree with you. I think it's hard. This is one of the reasons when we get to SAU merger, I don't think it's such a bad idea, because then you have one line total SAU costs,
Yes.
right? You have one line, high school costs, Barnstable Elementary School costs. Like, we should be able to do that, but we have to do it on a slide or a handout or something like that if we want to
Well,
do
the
it.
only reason I say that is because my philosophy is always keep it simple.
Yep.
And not to be insulting to anybody, but I think that the vast majority, the simpler you keep it and the more clarity you keep it,
Yep.
you then the people who are voting, and I say especially like people older like me and stuff who have been around for many years, and they're going to definitely get up and say, oh, I want to cut it by $2 million.
Sure.
Okay, well this is what you're cutting.
Right.
You can't cut debt service.
Yep.
So when you realize you're cutting $2 million, you're affecting the kids' program.
And also, I'm sure you're
And
aware
you're
of this.
not cutting salaries
You're in,
either.
well, you are here. You are here. You're not at the high school, and that's another unique twist
Right.
of how the JMA works, right? So something as drastic as a $2 million reduction. You're absolutely right. It would not eliminate the debt service payments. That would
It's
still
not
happen.
going to.
It also would not eliminate more than 5% of the money owed to the high school. So 1.9 million or something like that. Almost all of $2 million would have to come out of what happens in this building. And if you look back at the budget and the cover sheet, that's not where the increases are.
I mean,
So we would really be cutting what happens.
I'm just trying to give you a heads up.
Yeah, no.
I've lived in this
I know.
community long enough, been through enough of these budget meetings and understanding what they're doing, but I can honestly tell you, someone's gonna get up there and say something like that.
Sure.
And I think the clarity you can put in forth to make sure they understand that what they're cutting, and I know you tried it last time, it didn't
Well, it was a
go-
couple years ago. Yeah.
but also, because what they're trying to cut salaries. do, and they don't understand they can't
They
do
can,
it.
yeah.
But the major impact is definitely gonna be programming. But
Right.
also, they don't realize they can't impact this debt service.
Right.
I'm just giving you a heads
So
up.
it's
what we're
it's
doing.
positions, right? So
Yeah.
the meeting can cut salaries in that we would have to cut positions. That's what would end up happening.
Exactly.
You know, and then it becomes a question of scale, right?
Correct.
One position is somewhere with benefits and retirement and FICA and everything. Call it anywhere from $80,000 to $120,000. So call it on average 100,
Mm-hmm.
right? So a $2 million cut in the school operating budget, you could think of as, after a little bit from here and there, think of it as 18 positions in a school that has, what, 43, 44 teachers? 45? You know, and 23 pairs in RBT. So you're talking about a quarter of the staff, 20% of the staff.
I mean, they're gonna try to do their damnedest. I mean,
Yeah, but
the
there's
new
another thing.
School is definitely a sore spot for many people in this community, especially with their tax bill now. And they're gonna come in and try to cut this budget as much as they can.
So, your first year on this board, Doreen, everyone else here has been through this, you know.
I've been through this.
What's going to happen at the meeting is absolutely what's going to happen at the meeting.
It is.
But how much, like, you're the school board, right? We've got a school that on a per pupil basis is spending in the bottom 10 or 15% of the state. So out of fear of the meeting, do you propose that, staying there? Or do you propose doing something about it and then letting the chips fall where they may?
I'm just giving you
Yeah, no, I know.
my
I've
past.
been doing this a long time. I know exactly what's going to happen at a meeting.
I've been doing this a
I
long
enjoy the
time.
meetings.
Well, I think that stresses the importance of having an early PowerPoint to work on. Because we got a lot of things we want to cover, and we have a lot of concerns. I mean, even last year, they tried to eliminate 3 positions, which they didn't understand where they were coming from.
And it just brings me to the fact, she's right. I mean, I know how these people are gonna come in here and what they're gonna try to do.
Right. So that's a good example. So one person stood up and tried to do that, right? And in our world, in the 21st century, surrounded by social media, the voice of one person is amplified, and it's easy to think that they represent more than they do. But in the end, did anyone count the votes last year? It wasn't close. It was not close. Everything passed. Everything was supported. And that could change, right? At any given meeting, that could change. It's changed in other towns, it could change here.
It's been the same every year for the past almost 10 years being on here.
One thing I'd like to have changed is they don't have secret ballot on everything.
I know, it's
Another
brutal.
state law. Well, you had a chance to go to SB2 a couple of years ago. Maybe that'll happen again.
Oh, please.
No.
That's the worst thing ever. I'm sure you
Actually,
know
we
it
have
from
towns
out.
that are reversing it.
It's so hard to reverse it.
Yeah, no one
Once
can
it's
get
in.
It
it
is, but
reversed.
we have towns that are doing it.
They're trying, yeah.
They're trying.
So we went over this budget line by line on December, I think it was the 17th with Eunice, and I think we found $14,000. I mean, there are actually, you know, it's unfortunate the way all these other things conspire, the stuff we can't really control, because we've made a bunch of cuts. There's actually a position reduction in this budget, not cutting programming just due to numbers of kids. We have a total of 29 students in first grade. So when they go to second grade, that's 2 classrooms, and it'll still be 14 and 15 in each, which is great. We're not going to lay off a teacher. We're not going to lay off a teacher. There's always some attrition at the end of the year, so we can move people around. And then that's going to follow along, right? That group of 30 kids will go to third grade, right? And even if a couple move in, by third and fourth grades, if you have 18 kids in each of those 2 rooms, that's fine. So it'll be at least a few years before the board might have to revisit adding that position back in. But right now, to keep it just doesn't make sense, especially looking at an operating budget that's up like this. Just didn't make sense. And then on committee, positions. We used to carry 20, something like that, positions for committees within this school, but now we have more shared committees. So we're putting 2 people from Barnstead on a committee instead of a committee of 6 from within the school. So we're down a lot in that line. So those things, we've done those things. I think that, you know,
Didn't we make one of the, it's minor compared to the budget, the cuts we made, but in building maintenance, we were able to cut something because of the construction that's going on.
yep, you know, we shouldn't, repairs, right? We're not doing as many repairs right now because we're able to turn to the contractors and say, hey, fix that as part of the project.
We don't have that building rental on there either.
And we don't have the building budgets.
Should have been highlighted.
Well, that'd be on one of our PowerPoints. No rentals.
We're not spending almost $1 million.
Oh, yeah.
So I agree entirely with working on presentation materials early is going to be important this year, because the other thing that we haven't talked about yet is this is the year, and I've held back a lot. We've been working on at the joint board level the open enrollment and innovation school stuff now since really 2020, right? April of 2020 is the first time we talked about both ideas, and I've held back from making real financial projections. I know we've all talked about them, but you won't find documents where I've put out in public, like, expect this much revenue, because I know that once you say those kinds of things, like, you know, people expect them to happen. But now that the Supreme Court ruled as it did unanimously in September, this is the year to talk about revenue. I think we have to, because it helps with everything else, right? For people to understand what the revenue position of the joint Alton and Barnstead boards should look like over the next few years.
And I think it's important to talk about it because it's not, we can talk about open enrollment and those are kids coming to the high school, but at some point we need to better explain that the money that's coming in over time is gonna go back to the towns.
Yeah, and that's sort of, that talking point is embedded in 1 or 2 of the articles here, proposed for this year. So after the budget, if Alton has to act on these now because of their SB2 schedule, you have another meeting in January. If you want to hold off on acting on recommending these other articles after the budget, I'd rather you wait and talk more than show a split vote, or even worse, you know, 6 years in, say, yeah, we don't want to do that anymore, which would also be news to Alton. Not only me, but them. And a lot of other people, some of whom we've signed contracts with. So I just think it's worth being careful and deliberate over those considerations about those warrant articles.
So let's tackle the first one first. We'll entertain a motion on the overall budget.
I make a motion to approve the recommended operating budget for FY27.
Second.
Further discussion on that? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that passes. As for warrant articles, do you wish to go through those now and then? No?
No, I think we should wait.
I mean, if you want to talk about them now, not vote on them.
Well, we've already talked about them at the high school.
Okay. So you think we'll be ready for next meeting to vote on? Everybody?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I presented a summary of these in November, so that if there were any questions or was going to be discussion, people could reach out. I haven't heard anything. Presented them again in December to the joint board.
So
You know, if there are any reservations about any of these things, it's important to discuss those, not just here, but also with the other half of the joint board, and with potentially K-12, who we have a contract with, to do some of these things. Never mind the amount of work that I do and have done in Concord that sort of changed my position in the field of education over the last few years, all based on strategically, this is what these boards have wanted to do now for years.
So if there's questions or concerns, and you want to have further discussion, just send me an email. If I can put it on the joint board meeting if you want, and I can also put it on our next meeting as well to discuss these warrant articles if that's the pleasure of the board.
I just have one quick question, and correct me if I don't remember correctly. I don't believe we normally put the JMA recommendation on our warrant articles.
I'll double check it if we don't, I'll remove it.
Okay, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't
I
remember.
can't remember that either.
So we'll
I don't
match
think
whatever
we do
we've
either.
done.
I don't remember. Yeah, I don't remember.
I,
So-
don't remember.
I normally recall it's Barnstead Board and
Mhm.
the Barnstead
Budget
Budget.
committee. Yeah, I don't remember JMA.
Well, if it had to do with Prospect, I think is where it might have, but I.
No, even when we brought their contracts,
Okay.
it's just been
Yeah.
Barnstead.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
I think you're right.
all could vote no, and we could vote yes,
Okay.
and we could vote no, and they could vote yes, and then it still goes all to hell at the high school. Realistically.
I just,
I remember that.
I brought that up I'm glad everybody here kind of remembers it the same way I do.
Yeah.
And I wanted to say that's why I voted against these at the JMA, because I think it's the obligation of the local towns to vote on their warrant articles.
So I'm looking at the fiscal '25 warrant. So it was the March 2024 meeting, not last year's, but the year before. And you are right. All the recommendations look like they are local school board.
Yep.
Local school board, local budget committee, local school board, local budget committee. I'm looking for something that relates specifically to the high school. So here's one: to discontinue some capital reserve and expendable trust funds at Prospect Mountain High School. And the recommendations are only by the Barnstead School Board and the Barnstead Budget Committee.
Yeah, and then I think,
it's our warrant.
Yep.
That's why it makes sense.
well, and
to-
normally they'll question, like, what did Alton
But
vote?
yeah, and that's always on
And
we
our,
put it
we'll
on the
talk
slide,
about
so-
it,
Yeah.
right,
Because
because
we'll
that
know.
works for us. We say Alton passed it.
right.
Yeah, because they're always first. Okay, that being said, so we don't need to bring this up to JMA then. We'll
No.
bring it back to our board, with those changes. Is there gonna need further discussion or concerns? Let me know, we can put it on there and talk about for next month. If there isn't any, then I would assume that with those changes, we'd vote on for next month.
Yep, and that's prior to
This
our
month.
third and final meeting with the Barnstead
Right,
Budget
which
Committee.
is, that's our
So that's
deadline.
perfect. Also, just in terms of sharing the information, everything here has been in a public document now for more than 60 days anyway. So I think in terms of an overview of what's going on in the school district for the budget committee, we can talk about all of this. But then we'll give them the warrant articles. We always do at their last meeting with us.
And just for public, I misspoke, we're already in January, the next meeting will be here in January, the 21st, so.
So,
Not February.
we are gonna have other warrant articles. We're gonna have,
So we should have two articles, four really related to collective bargaining, because you have the article to fund the contract, and then an article allowing one special meeting if the first one failed.
right,
And
we're gonna have two
You'll have that
contracts.
for the teachers at the high school, and you'll
And
have that
for
for
the
the
paras.
paras at the high school. And I think that it's okay to say there's a tentative agreement in place for the joint board to consider with its teachers on the 13th, and I can tell the two members of the negotiating team that once we meet next week, you will also have a tentative agreement in place with the paras.
Right, so we'll ratify on the 13th.
We'll ratify on the 13th, and I've already accommodated that on Alton's schedule, and it's not a problem on Barnstead's schedule. You have more time than
Yeah.
the SB2 schedule allows.
It's removed.
Okay.
Perfect.
They voted the budget.
Yeah, we voted right.
Yes,
Thanks.
we
The
did.
budget's been voted through.
I know I was here.
All right, then, next up on is the first reading of policy.
Make a motion to approve the first reading of policy JICL-R.
Second.
This is just a first reading, so any discussion on it? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Alright, that passes. Go up to personnel.
I make a motion that we approve the hiring of the new special education case manager.
Second.
I have a motion and a second, any discussion? Seeing none, hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Alright,
The position has been vacant for 3 years. We are thrilled.
that's good. Next up on the agenda is the public input, same as rules as before. Seeing none, hearing none, I'll close public input. Do we need non-public?
Yes, one thing.
Okay, we need non-public.
I make a motion to go into non-public under RSA 91-A:3, Roman numeral 2, A and C.
Second.
Roll call. Doreen?
Doreen, yes.
Yes.
Whatever. I'm thinking, my mind is in theory
Yes.
right now.
Yes.
Yes. We are now in non-public.